All right, Mayor, thank you for sitting down with us. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
You've been in this job for over a decade now.
Yes.
At this point, what do you see as the major challenge or challenges facing the city of Asheville?
Well, a lot has changed in a decade. I'd say one of the biggest challenges for cities, not just Asheville, is being able to hire all the employees you need to run a city. So as everybody knows, the job market's a lot different than it was 10 years ago. Right. You could have had an opening for a position 10 years ago and had 20 applicants, and now you're hoping to get a handful. And folks have a lot of choices, whether they want to work for Public Works or drive a bus or, work in a restaurant.
So you have some of the same administrative challenges that other organizations do, including, you're making me think of like Asheville City Schools.
Right.
They have a lot of staffing issues, or have had at times.
Or hospital, nursing,
Right.
all these sorts of jobs are just, it's hard to keep them all full.
Well, in your State of the City address earlier this year, you brought up infrastructure. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges you see with infrastructure, and how are you facing those?
Well, aging infrastructure is the challenge. So, if you look at a city like Asheville, there was a lot that was built during certain times, and now it all needs to be maintained, or it all needed to be maintained or replaced yesterday. Right. So it's two issues. One is, of course, cost, and the cost to the constituency, to the people that live in your city. But then also just the capacity to be able to get all these projects done. I think a lot of people know that are out there trying to hire contractors, trying to hire folks to get the work done. It's hard to. We've had projects we put out to bid here at the city and not had a bidder.
Right.
So that's a real issue.
Well, you're making me think of the I-26 connector project. Granted, that's the DOT, it's the state, right. But at the same time, it's going to influence the city of Asheville enormously. Mm-hmm. Is there a plan in place?
Oh yeah, the city has been working with the Department of Transportation before I came on board to make sure the I-26 project worked as well as it could for the city of Asheville. It's going to pass right through us. There's going to be a new bridge right through the center of town. So we have a whole bunch of volunteers in our community that have worked on various ad hoc committees. We have an aesthetics committee that helped redesign, to the extent we can and could, the I-26 project so it would bring the greatest benefit to the folks that live here. So for example, the city council approved the funding to partner with the DOT to convert the Jeff Bowen Bridge, which is the existing bridge, to have bike and pedestrian infrastructure once the new bridge goes in place. So that if you're in West Asheville, you could bike or walk to downtown.
Well, the idea, as I understand it, is that it's going to be more of a gateway to the city.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So there's an aesthetic quality to it too.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to create more of a boulevard into downtown, and let the new bridge will be the pass-through traffic for I-26 drivers.
All right, I'm going to shift gears here for a moment. Being mayor is a tough job because you get blame and you don't always get credit. Moving to crime and the economy. About a year and a half ago, a college buddy of mine came, and we were downtown, and he told me, he said, you know what, I come with my wife 3 or 4 times to Asheville. We've always really loved it. We're probably not going to come back because we didn't feel safe on the streets at night. What has changed since then?
Well, tell me more about why he said that to you. What was it about that night that didn't feel safe to him?
In his words, there were too many scary people out, and it scared my wife.
Yeah, so that sounds to me like someone who's talking about their exposure to people who are experiencing homelessness in our downtown. And for some people, that does bring them fear. For other people, it does not. Mm-hmm. But it is a crisis for Asheville in terms of the volume, the number of people who are experiencing homelessness in our community, and how we best respond and prevent homelessness in our community. We're obviously not alone. There are cities all across our nation. If you travel and go to other cities, it's hard to find one where you're not going to interact or see someone who's experiencing homelessness.
All right, point. In terms of policing, though, you're making me think of the Downtown Improvement District.
Yep.
Are we seeing any results there yet?
So it's early days. So what you're talking about is the business improvement district that was adopted by council and at the urging of the Chamber of Commerce and the volunteers that worked on that initiative. We being the council, have approved it and we have approved the funding for it. But it has not begun yet because the RFP to hire the contractor is out. So that will happen in the next few months, and we'll bring on board the contractor who will provide those services.
So in terms of goals and time frame, you're saying the next few months, and say a year from now, should folks expect to see some results?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, so downtown is a challenge. We want it to be a vibrant place. We want it to be a place people can visit, locals can experience, everyone can enjoy. And so there's kind of a multi-pronged effort, if you will. The city already has various ongoing programs in our downtown around cleanliness. We also have a firefighter program now that are community responders who are on the ground, helping keep eyes on the ground. And the chief of police is very focused on rebuilding a downtown unit once he's able to rebuild enough of his staff so that he can do that.
Right. Well, if I'm a business owner, I want to make sure that my customers are safe.
Sure.
And
absolutely.
that the value of my business is maintained, and same goes for property owners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the business improvement district will just build on these efforts. In addition, I would offer, the county is also working on efforts around the opioid crisis. They have a community paramedic program that is in our downtown as well. And this is to try to help bring relief to the police department, because so many of these situations really aren't policing situations that they're responding to, but fall on them. And it's more appropriate maybe for a nurse EMT to respond to the situation, or someone who is a mental health crisis counselor to respond to the situation. So we need to be able to help support the police and what they're trying to do to create community safety, but also provide a more appropriate response to some of these situations.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about homelessness. To your point, this is not just an Asheville issue. It's happening in cities all over this country and, frankly, in other nations in the world too. So especially since the pandemic.
Right.
That said, you've attended the Conference of Mayors in DC to look at ideas and possible solutions. At the same time, the point in time count between 2023 and 2024 saw the numbers of homeless people on the streets in Asheville actually go up. Solutions. What's on the table? What plans might the city be able to put in place to see a shift?
Well, I think that's everyone's top of mind question in terms of how we reduce homelessness and how we prevent future homelessness. Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, I did travel with a bunch of mayors from around the country to Washington, D.C. this spring, and the focus of that trip was to talk about housing vouchers. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about HUD housing vouchers. So people don't realize this, but our federal government provides thousands of housing vouchers in our community and in other communities across the nation to tenants to live in not public housing neighborhoods, but in privately owned multifamily housing apartments that are privately owned but take housing vouchers. So we have, but we need more. And so what we were up...
And you need landlords that are going to be willing to accept those.
That's right. We need, yes, both and. So what we were specifically talking to them about was increasing the number of veteran housing vouchers for veterans who are experiencing homelessness. Mm-hmm. In Asheville, the last point in time count of homelessness in Asheville had 26% veterans. That's a really high number for a city. And one of the main reasons that's true in Asheville is that we have the VA hospital. So we are seeing people coming here to receive services. Our VA hospital is the top in the nation, so that makes a lot of sense. And so we need to make sure that we have enough vouchers in our community so that people can receive housing. To answer your question, the way to tackle homelessness, the number one way is to increase housing opportunities. And we can see that statistically in communities that have tight housing markets, they have the highest rates of homelessness. And I think for a lot of people, they think, well, isn't it mental health? Isn't it drugs? Isn't it all these other things? But actually, percentage-wise, the number one correlation is housing availability.
Well, what I'm hearing is a mixture then of housing availability for either housing on a temporary basis and then maybe for the movement to long-term housing, and affordable housing is an issue. But to stay with the homelessness issues for a minute, I want to go to the Ramada Inn. This has been like a 3-year effort with multiple incarnations. On September 20th, there's going to be another deadline and an opportunity to decide the future of that property.
Right.
What are we looking at, and how can the people of Asheville have faith that it's finally going to move forward?
Right. So what the Ramada Inn proposal is for something called permanent supportive housing. And permanent supportive housing is designed for people who are experiencing homelessness and transitioning to housing. However, in order to stay continuously housed, they're going to need supportive services. And that's just true of a certain demographic of our population. If you move these folks to housing and you don't provide services, they're just going to become unhoused pretty quickly. So that's what we're talking about at the Ramada. Half those units are for veterans experiencing homelessness, and the other half are for non-veterans. We have something like this in our community already. Homeward Bound operates Compass Point at the old Days Inn on Tunnel Road. It is extremely challenging to provide this service. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of folks to provide the services, to keep the area safe, to make sure the neighborhood that surrounds it is safe as well. And that the tenants there are successful and transition out of homelessness successfully. I don't know whether the current buyer or provider of services who's wanting council approval to enter into this agreement is going to be the right fit for us. We're still in a due diligence process. I serve on the continuum of care for Buncombe County, which is the board that oversees the efforts around homelessness reduction and prevention. And we're lucky on the COC that we have a lot of talented individuals with a lot of experience that have vetted this and taken a look at it, and they're pretty divided. So I think here's the challenge. I mean, I don't know how in the weeds you want to get on this project, right, but the current potential buyer has the backing of private equity. So they're able to use cash to buy the property and to completely redevelop it.
So they have the capital.
Right. That's something we're missing in Asheville. We don't have a lot of providers in the homelessness services arena that have that kind of capital to be able to do that.
And this is an out-of-state organization, correct?
Yes. And so on the one hand, this is their endeavor. They're not asking the city for money. They're not asking the county for money. They're not asking anyone for money here to take this on. They think they can do it. I think there are some questions about whether we think that will be viable.
Right.
But that's their risk. Where we as a community come into play in this analysis, if you will, is do we think they're going to be able to operate a safe facility, a place that really achieves the goals intended, and that is to take about 100 people who are experiencing homelessness and transition them out of homelessness and get them successfully housed?
Well, and honestly, that's my question as I'm listening to you. The last opportunity came from a Los Angeles-based organization. It didn't work out. Is there some concern about another out-of-state organization that maybe doesn't have the same commitment to the local community?
I think that should be an issue that we look at. Again, there are not local folks here that have the kind of capital to make these investments. But there's two components to permanent supportive housing. There's whoever the investor is that wants to buy it and redevelop it, use vouchers. This is a voucher-based income stream that's provided to that investor who builds this housing, okay? They're called project-based vouchers, and they're provided by HUD. This is why these projects even work at all, is because there's a dedicated income stream to pay the rents.
Right.
But the other component is the services. Who's going to be the service provider on the ground that is a partner in our community, that is continuously there, making sure that the tenants have all the services they need, that the project is safe for them and for the surrounding community, and that they are actually achieving the goals that they have stated. So it's these sort of two components. Now, The group that's offering to buy and redevelop this property is not ultimately going to be the service provider. That will be a different group. And right now, that is a local group. Okay. They're called Homeward Bound. They're going to do one part of it, and the VA hospital is going to provide the services to the veterans. So the question is, do we feel that's a successful model? Does Homeward Bound have the capacity? We know the VA hospital has the capacity. Right. Or are we setting ourselves up for either a project that doesn't deliver because it can't actually generate the revenue it needs to pay its mortgage, essentially? Or are we going to eventually have a problem down the line because the service provider doesn't have the capacity to provide all the services? This is the analysis you have to make when you're looking at something like this, and it's really difficult.
Right, and to that point, Homeward Bound has had its own changes in leadership, and there are challenges there. So it's a lot of faith, I would think, to put an organization that you're, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as a resident, you might question their ability to do this.
Yeah, I mean, Homeward Bound has been an incredible partner in our community for many, many, many years. They are struggling, like a lot of providers.
Right.
And I will say, in my due diligence efforts and through my work on homelessness, which has been kind of one of my focal points, I've had the opportunity to interview shelter providers all over the country.
Right.
And hear their challenges and what they're dealing with. And really, the biggest challenge is funding and capacity. So what's their income stream, and can they hire enough employees to provide the services they need? It's like every other industry in America right now that doesn't have enough of both of those things.
All right, there are a lot of issues.
Yep, no, we can talk about that one
for
a long time.
But it is an important one. And there's something that's sort of related to certainly the homeless issue that carries into other one. I love my neighborhood. We have a porch party once a month. Neighbors get together, potluck, and we really get to know each other, which is great. But there is a theme I hear over and over again. And that is this feeling or this sense that the city has lots of meetings, but it doesn't necessarily result in lots of change. As an example, in addition to the homeless issue, would be reparations. This is something, you've played a part in here with the Mayor's Organized for Reparations and Equity More, committed to investment in areas where there's disparity in the communities. We're seeing delays. In terms of timing, what's happening? When are we going to see some actual payout results, investment in the community?
And are you talking specifically around reparations?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing I would say is this isn't exactly an area that a bunch of cities have done, and it's really easy to do, and there's some roadmap that someone's already established and you can just knock it out. That's not the case. We are charting a new path. We are doing something that almost no other cities have done yet. Now, it's catching on. We're getting a lot of people reaching out to us and asking, what are you doing? How are you doing it? What are the ways to do it? And so I would say everyone needs to be patient because when you're doing something new and no one's done it before, it's you're kind of building that plane on the runway.
Do you get pushback on the whole idea of reparations?
Oh, sure. I think, it's really interesting to me. If I say the word reparations, it can be very polarizing. Yeah. But if I say to someone, what do you think about compensating a family member who used to live in a home in an area of our city where the city took that property through urban renewal and only gave that family $7,000 for that house that's now worth $500,000 and displaced that family to public housing, denying them the opportunity to create generational wealth through real estate, which is how most Americans have any generational wealth. And what do you think if I offered the descendants of that family maybe a down payment grant of $25,000 to buy their own home, to help establish generational wealth where they were deprived of that back in the 80s? And people will say, oh, that sounds fair. Right. That sounds like you're compensating somebody for an unfair taking that happened to their family. Well, that's reparations. But if you say reparations or you say fair compensation for something the city did to cause harm, people feel differently about it.
Because you're looking at, really, compensation is also a word that might be a little bit controversial, but what you're talking about is an investment to help those folks get on the other side of that.
And because they truly were not fairly compensated at the time
Right.
it happened. And we have people living in our community who can tell you the story of when it happened to them and their family.
Affordable housing. You're making progress, right?
It's like you got to keep it up. If you stop for 1 second, you're losing ground, and even then, you might be losing ground.
Well, on that note, is it enough? Is enough happening to actually affect the problem? In other words, 20 units here, 30 units there. Is that enough to really create enough affordable housing to reach a critical mass where it affects the issue here?
No, I don't think so. We know that 37% of the people that live in our community are paying more than 30% of their household income towards their mortgage, rent, their housing costs. Mm-hmm. And we know that we need 14,000 units of housing into the future. So I don't think local government, city, county, as much of an effort as we make, and we are probably one of the leaders in all the different tools around affordable housing, and we're doing all of them. I mean, this community has approved affordable housing bonds twice now. We're about to put another one on the ballot. We're doing everything we possibly can to try to leverage affordable housing in our community. But local governments, cities, counties, can only affect a drop in the bucket, if you will, compared to what the federal government does. As I mentioned to you, we have thousands of people in our community living on housing vouchers. We don't have thousands of people in our community living in city or county leveraged affordable housing units. So we're going to keep doing our part, but I think that it is a valid question to ask. Is it the best use of taxpayer money to subsidize affordable housing units by a city or a county when the cost relative to our budgets is so high? We need a national solution, and that's not happening yet.
You know, at the same time, on the county level, there's an increase in property taxes, which is going to make home ownership even less affordable for some folks. Are you concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think property tax burden is something we take very seriously. We would not raise property taxes unless absolutely necessary for that very reason. And we've tried to create programs to provide relief to those who are income qualified. What I would like to see is our state legislature give us some ways to raise taxes in other ways, other than property taxes.
Right.
So
generate revenue.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Asheville doesn't have a food and beverage tax. Well, a lot of tourist communities do have a food and beverage tax. If you go to Charleston or something like that, that would be great for our community because it would be such a way to harness money from visitors rather than locals. Just as an example. So I think we need to keep pushing on finding other opportunities to raise revenue rather than always on the backs of property taxpayers.
Switching gears here, discrimination. Saturday, July 29th, 3 Asheville residents were assaulted, sparking cries of anti-Semitism. Were you surprised when you heard this?
Well, no, unfortunately I wasn't surprised, and I did condemn it. I think we're seeing anti-Semitism on the rise in our country, and Asheville has experienced it as well. As a person who's Jewish, a lot of people know that. To me, it's terrifying to see that in our community, and I'm terrified for our Jewish community. So I think we need to keep having conversations with each other, try to better understand one another. Obviously, the war in Israel and Gaza is
sparking,
bringing a lot of this to a head, and that doesn't appear to be ending anytime soon.
Other forms of hate based on race, gender, sexual orientation, do you see or feel any rise in those in the area?
I think that has always been an issue from time to time in our community, and I've always been very quick to condemn it. But from what I hear from folks is that Asheville is a much more welcoming and open community for all folks. In fact, we know people move here because they feel more comfortable in our community than they did in their old community. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to continue to try to be a haven for that, for folks who can just relax and be able to be themselves here in Asheville.
Well, on that note, you've been in this position for over 10 years now. What are you most proud of?
I think that the thing that's super important to me in leading this community is making sure we have a government that does the best job it can do to address the needs of our community. And we have, as I mentioned, had a bond that passed in 2016, and we were able to step up our investment in our community significantly. If you go around to parks and places like that, you see new playgrounds and things that the community can enjoy and experience. So I think that's critical. And I'm also really proud that we have evolved as a city from doing more than just patching potholes, and we have tried to push into a broader governance structure that looks at things like equity, that looks at issues of race, that looks at our community as a whole and tries to even out our investments in our communities. There are neighborhoods that were historically deprived that we have reinvested in. So just in changing the way we think about the role of a city in the lives of people.
Oh, good, because it's a small city relative to the big cities in our nation, but it's still a city.
Right, yeah.
With city problems and issues that come with it.
Mm-hmm.
That said, you are sort of known as a nuts and bolts kind of person. You can get in the weeds on policy things, but I'm going to compare you for a moment to Zeb Smathers, mayor of Canton.
Love Zeb, everybody loves Zeb.
He is a cheerleader for Canton.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a cheerleader for Asheville?
Not the way Zeb's a cheerleader for Canton. I mean, Zeb's done a great job. They have had tragedy strike. They've had a hurricane. They've had their biggest employer close. He's got a whole set of issues that we are fortunate not to have to face in Asheville. I think every mayor is a cheerleader for their city. If they're not, they probably shouldn't be the mayor. And that might be kind of annoying to people because they want to see more criticism. I think there are definitely areas that we need to be criticized around, but there's things that we need to cheer about. And I'm really proud of our city staff, our police department, our fire department, our public works, our planning department, all the folks that put their heart and soul into this community. So I think it's important for the mayor to play that role.
So are you enthused about the future of this area?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to understand, I go around and go to conferences and I hang out with these other mayors and I talk to them about the challenges in their community. There are cities in the Midwest and the Rust Belt in areas that have atrophied. They're, begging people to make investments in their community or grow jobs, or, we have a different set of problems.
Right.
We're very popular, and that comes with a different set of problems. But those are problems I want to have, and I want to be able to be challenged by.
Okay, but you must have a vision about where you're going. What do you see, ideally, 5-10 years down the road? What do you want this place to be?
Well, I think the biggest focus for us, there's a few buckets of focus that I want to see. I want to see us make sure we're renewed and on a cycle of continuous investment in our infrastructure, whether it's crumbling parking decks or fixing roads or rebuilding rec centers or rebuilding firehouses for our firefighters to live in. I want to make sure that as a city we are hitting on all cylinders, our water department, all aspects of the city that provide services to the community. So to me, having that machine running well, I think that's critical. I want to see us do the best job we can to find relief around affordable housing for our community. Because ultimately, we need everyone in Asheville to be able to have opportunity and to be able to live here as comfortably as possible. And that, I see it. There are so many people struggling to pay the rent, to pay the mortgage, to find a better paying job. Those are some of the critical issues that you have to keep working on. To say that we'll fix it and in 10 years it's smooth sailing, I don't think that's true. I think it's going to be a continuous challenge.
But as a measurable, you could see movement in those directions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had some great transformation. We've got some more that needs to happen. The River Arts District, transforming it from an industrial area to a place where people can go ride their bikes and enjoy themselves, and seeing folks want to develop that area for housing. We have one on the agenda tonight, another developer who wants to build housing down there. I mean, these are great transformations of the city, but, you know, I think to your point earlier, in your friend who visited Asheville and had an experience that concerned them, we want to make sure that we are focusing on all parts of our city, and that we are making sure we're doing the best job we can so that everyone can enjoy and experience our community.
Last question. You're halfway through your third term.
You can ask me if I'm going to run again.
Absolutely.
Mayor forever. I don't know. You know, when I finish this term, I'll have been in office 17 years. That's a long time. I ran for office the first time when my youngest son was 2, and he's graduating high school this year.
So he's only known you as Mayor Manheimer.
Right. Might be confusing to my children.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of women don't even run for office till their kids are out of the house. So I guess, you know, that's the opposite. So I don't know. We'll see. I love this job. I absolutely love being mayor. I love Asheville. This is the joy of my life. So.
Hey, Mayor Esther Manheimer, thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. We covered a lot of bases.